Welcome to the Awakened Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Nancy Walters. Get ready to create magic and miracles as you lean into your heart's desires. I believe not only does the heart want what it wants, but it knows. This show is a weekly deep dive into what it means to live from an awakened heart. I'll be sharing inspiring stories and real conversations with people just like you, who have turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. My mission is to show you how you too can be connected and heart-centered in every area of your life. Your journey to aligning with more love, more joy, and your wildest dreams come true starts now. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Awakened Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Nancy Walters. I have a very special conversation for you. You're going to really enjoy this. It's very touching in so many ways. For anyone that is a mother, you can really relate to this, whether you have children now, you've raised them, or you're thinking about having children in the future. Today's conversation is with Amy Belair, who herself was a doula and a midwife, and she saw what happens in the birthing rooms and how a lot of women are not allowed to have the experience that their intuition is telling them that they should have. And it takes away from the experience with mother and the baby, and how the medical personnel and the hospitals are there to really protect themselves, from liability from the mother or something happening to the baby, protecting themselves from death. So they go into a lot of automatic procedures to protect themselves. And they are mothers feel pressured a lot to partake in certain procedures. So it's really taken away from a lot of the experience. This is leading women to feel like they're not being heard and their intuition is being overridden by the panic and the chaos in the room. Amy lost her second-born son through an intense medical matrix incident, and she experienced tremendous healing through a cathartic free birth. William, you're going to hear the story of him and her second-born Killian in this episode. It's very touching. I was incredibly moved by her story. When she lost her second-born son, it really activated her dormant psychic gifts and led her to finding the Akashic Records. Amy Belair is a cosmic oracle and channel holder of the Christos Frequency, co-author of the Priestess Transmissions, and host of the top-rated Third Eye Awakening podcast. Amy is here to facilitate the Ascension process by translating 5D, 6D, 7D light codes into 3D English for humans to better understand. Through her various free offerings and private mentorships, she guides lightworkers to activate and develop psychic gifts that are waiting to be reclaimed. And through this episode, I hope you feel very inspired and has deeply moved as I am and was. And I hope you, this free birth, it might be something for you to look into, and how you can return to how nature intended. I mean, like I said, granted, it's always good to have people on standby in case something goes wrong, but we've really lost out on, what our generations have done before us. And, we're bringing another soul into this world, and, let's call it a sacred birth. We can all experience a sacred birth. And here she is, today's guest, Amy Belair. Hello, Amy. Welcome to the Awakened Heart Podcast.
Hi, Nancy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have a conversation with you.
I'm excited to talk with you as well. And I am really excited about this beautiful conversation we're going to have. And I think it's really important for women to hear, with everything that's happening in the world today. I feel that femininity is being really attacked right now, and women, and they're being turned into birthing people and all that. But I feel we're beautiful creator beings. I mean, we all are, but women, can create life in their wombs, and they nurture from their bodies. And there's just ways that you've experienced through like Western medicine and through being in some kind of corporate entity as a doula and a midwife, that some of the ways that they were handling this or some of the systems that were in place just didn't resonate with who you were. And you just couldn't like stand for that. So you had to, you broke out on your own and you did your own thing. Can you kind of give a little background about yourself and your experience in that field?
Yeah, absolutely. So I honestly, from like my earliest self-aware memories, which was like my earliest memories were about 18 months old, but my earliest memories of knowing myself as a self was about somewhere in my 2-year-old range. And I was like, I am here to be a mother and I'm here to work with babies. That's all I knew. I didn't even know what a midwife was until my early 20s. I didn't even really at that age know what pregnancy was because I was an only child at that time. But I knew that babies are a thing and they are for me. And so fast forward many, many, many years, I tried a bunch of different things. I was an artist. I became a mother. Basically, I got pregnant with my first son when I was in my early 20s. And that's how I discovered what midwives were. I found the book Spiritual Midwifery right before he was conceived at a used bookstore by Ina May Gaskin. And I was like, oh, like I just knew this is what I'm here for. This spiritual reverence for the pregnancy and motherhood and babies and families. It was just like a balm to my soul. And I had my baby with a midwife. It was a home birth, and it was the most spiritually activating thing I had ever experienced. It was incredible. And my midwife was an absolute angel. And afterwards, she came and told me that she thought I should be a midwife because it was a long labor and it was painful. No complications or anything, but she just said that I handled myself in a way that she was like, you're made to be a midwife. So I hung on to that dream and try, I had to go through processes of feeling worthy of it before I finally got into the program, which was highly competitive. And I felt like I was finally on my right path and was just so excited to be doing this work. And I mean, I loved it, especially in my first couple of years. I absolutely loved it. And then I got pregnant with my second son. Now, this is with a different man. My oldest son is 11 at the time. So had been a long time. And this was a long awaited second pregnancy. And it's with my now partner. We got pregnant very quickly after meeting each other. It really took us by surprise. But we were both excited for the baby. And I was, in the middle of my midwifery program. So I was working as a midwife, but not being paid. I was an apprentice or a student. And while I was on placement, I got into the tiniest, most seemingly innocuous fender bender. Somebody from behind just like didn't have enough time. Like I barely had enough time to stop. And then the person behind me didn't have enough time. So I got bumped from behind and then banged into the person in front of me. So it was a double bang. And I didn't seem to be hurt or anything. But 10 days later, I had a big bleed and I knew it was all related. And then 5 weeks after that, my water broke and I was only 20 weeks pregnant. And so that's only half cooked. And I knew that the outcome was not looking good. But I managed to stay pregnant for 6 more weeks. I ended up going into the hospital, like a big tertiary level, city hospital, to await the inevitable preterm birth. And I went into labor when I was about 26 weeks and eventually gave birth to my son. I battled it, tried to keep him in, but it didn't work. And he came out, he was born, and he was just absolutely perfect, like so beautiful. He weighed just under 2 pounds and was just like, oh, so beautiful. And he seemed really strong. Everybody was very, like all the hospital staff, they were very optimistic about it. He didn't require a lot of support. Like he didn't need to be on a lot of medications. And for 11 days, everything seemed to be really good. And then on the 11th day, all of a sudden, I could just tell something was off. I didn't know what it was. I could just tell. And I mentioned to the nurse, and she agreed something was off. And so she called in the neonatal pediatric team to come and run some tests. And what they found was that there was a perforation in his intestine, which basically was meaning that he was going septic, because the bacteria that lives in our intestine was leaking into his bloodstream. And he had to have emergency abdominal surgery. And, for 3 days, he kind of like hung in the balance. And we thought that he stabilized. He did stabilize. And we thought for a moment that he was going to be able to stay. But they did a routine ultrasound of his head and found real-time, very significant bleeds in his lower brainstem, which would affect every aspect of his being. And so we were lovingly, compassionately advised that his outcome would not be very good, and that really they recommended we would let him go. And that was the hardest decision that we had to make. My husband was very firm and resolute that like he was not going to ask our son to suffer through an entire lifetime just for us. And I'm glad he was so resolute, because I needed to lean on that, because to make that call was excruciating. But ultimately, I realized that the greatest gift of love that I could give him was to set him free. So that's what we did. And the grief that ensued was incredible. And I, naturally, obviously was grieving my son, but I was also grieving my career path, because it's like, I just knew that I could not do that work anymore. And I made myself do it. I made myself go back and finish my program. And I made myself work for a year as a licensed registered midwife, being paid. And I still loved all of the people that I worked with, but it was extremely painful, as you can imagine. And I also saw it with fresh eyes, where I could see the trauma that was playing out amongst all of the clients, all of the staff, the hospital staff, my midwife colleagues, so much trauma. And I could see the dysfunction of the system, and the way that the sacredness of birth was being absolutely destroyed. So my integrity just would not allow me to, as I was explaining to you before we hit record, that essentially because everybody is afraid of death, which is understandable, because it's very tragic and very painful. But it's like they're so afraid of death, but they're more afraid of being blamed for the death. And so everything that you're doing is protecting yourself first as a midwife or a nurse or a doctor, which means that you are not centering and prioritizing your client or the baby. You are protecting yourself. It's very self-motivated, and you're essentially throwing people's experience under the bus in ways that are not negligible. And so I couldn't keep going with it. It was too much for me to deal with.
Now, when you're saying, I get it. So they're so afraid of a baby dying, a mother dying, that they're just going into these automatic, almost like protocols to protect yourself and protect yourself from liability, instead of honoring what the mother wants. So they're going to all these extra measures to protect themselves before the measures are even needed, correct?
Oh, yes. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So like a lot of women, want to have natural birth. And then, I know a lot of women that have had babies that they're, even before they have the baby, they're trying to push for C-sections before that. So I know that's, caused a lot of people a lot of distress. After this whole experience, you opened up to your intuitive psychic gifts afterwards. How did that come about?
So I had always been psychically sensitive, but I would say I was not activated in it. So I would periodically have experiences and then just dismiss them. But I was always like, oh God, I just want to be psychic. And then after my son died, it's like the amount of grief I felt was just sort of like, can I swear on your podcast?
Yes.
Okay.
I
I
do
didn't
all
give
the
a
time.
shit anymore about what anybody thought about me. Whereas before I really cared if people thought I was woo-woo, so I was kind of suppressing my own psychic gifts by caring more about what other people thought of me, which they probably really weren't thinking about me at all, but that's what we do. Whereas after he died, I was like, I could give a crap. I just don't care. I just want to connect with my son. And what he came through to me before he was even conceived. And then I was in communication with him while I was pregnant. And in that 6 weeks after my water broke, I had to navigate the total lack of control over what was going to happen. And so I had to bring myself into the present moment over and over and over again, out of future tripping and like into like, he's with me right now. He's with me right now. Everything is okay right now, and really dial into the present and be so deeply grateful for every second I got with him that, it really fine-tuned me to my connection with him. And then after he died, I think because I primed myself in that way, not with the intention of developing my psychic gifts, just to navigate the intensity of the situation, afterward, I found like he would come through to me and I knew right away, oh, that's him. I knew I wasn't making it up. And so I was no longer dismissing things. And I also felt the choice point where free will comes into play, where we do have to choose, am I going to validate myself or am I going to dismiss it? And because it was my son, like the love that I have for him is so deep that it's like a motivator to not let my ego distortions dismiss my connection with him. So he was kind of like my carrot, my dangling carrot that gave me the motivation to up level my own game, essentially. And I noticed that when I was in the darkest depths of grief, I couldn't feel him. And there was no way out of that. Like I just had to be present with my grief and let it be there. But I noticed that the way that grief works is that you get these huge waves and you feel like you're going to suffocate and drown in it and die and never emerge. And then eventually it passes, even temporarily, because I don't know, I think it's a self-preservation mechanism. And you kind of go into this weird sort of denial or disassociation. And I think honestly, it's because you have to. And in that space, I could watch things like Arrested Development and laugh and smile and feel happy. And I noticed in those times was when I would get messages from him. So I realized, oh, this is all about my consciousness and my frequency. And I learned how to fine tune my frequency, not beat myself up for being in a low frequency of grief, but learned how to like take that, like feel myself rising out of it and then like get higher. Like I needed to reach him. And what that did was it not only opened me up to him, but it opened me up to other people, to plant consciousness, to crystals. Like I was just so hypersensitive all the time. And I really desired to find the answer to why he passed away. And that led me to the Akashic Records, because I couldn't, there was one piece I couldn't get over, was this fear that I had caused it on some level. And so on one hand, I saw him as like, like a gift, a total gift to me. And on the other hand, I was beating myself up for it and taking like intensely self-critical inventory of everything that I had ever done and every time that I had ever hurt anybody and all the things I might have done to deserve it. And I was like, this makes no sense. There has to be a reason. And I heard the words Akashic Records on a podcast and I Googled, I just heard it and I was like, that's it. I don't know what that is, but I know I have to follow it. And I Googled it and I found Jennifer Longmore's program and I signed up for her self-study program. And I went in with the big guns. I didn't do any like little tiptoe practice sessions. I went in with my questions. Why did this happen? And I got an answer. And I saw my son's soul. We were seated at this rectangular table. It kind of reminded me of, like a lawyer's office or something when there's a divorce happening. For some reason, he and I weren't communicating directly. There was what's the word? Like a mediator who was talking to me. I don't know why that is, because I do communicate directly with my son, but That's the way it appeared. And I was shown that it was not my karma or my husband's karma. It was my son Killian's karma. And even that, like, my whole concept of karma was healed, meaning that there was just something that he needed this experience for a certain reason. And the reason, to put it in a tiny nutshell, is that in a previous incarnation, I think it was during World War I, he was a German soldier and so was my husband. And they were brother soldiers. And it was such a nightmare. It was so horrible that he eventually reached his breaking point, and he, put his gun in his mouth and killed himself. And in that moment, he was in such a darkness that he could not connect with the effect that was going to have on the people he loved. And so after he died, when his perspective was expanded, he could see the devastation that caused to his brother soldiers, to the family he was never returning home to. He was just a young man, and he just wanted a mulligan, kind of like he wanted a do-over. He wanted to go back into an experience of intense suffering and not choose his own exit. And he made this arrangement with us in advance, knowing, like, with the intention that we would choose to let him go, but knowing that there was a risk that we might not choose that we might choose to hold on to him. Mm-hmm. And it's not like, it can sound like it was penance, but it's not. It's like bringing closure to an open end of energy that was created, like an energetic theme that we understand as karma. And so he chose my husband because he knew my husband would let him go. And he chose me because he knew that I would love him no matter what, that I would want him so much that it wouldn't even matter to me if he had a completely broken body and a brain that didn't work, that I would just want him so much that it would be kind of like a soothing balm to his pain while he was in this brief incarnation. And that information instantly liberated me, Nancy. Like it felt like complete healing, where I still grieve his absence, but I no longer feel like anything bad happened. It just was painful. It was just very intense. I feel like, oh my God, I did it. I did what I was supposed to do. He did it. My husband did it. We all did it. And it completely changed everything for me. And then after that, I wanted to be able to offer the same gift to other people and read people's Akashic Records.
And you got that on the first time that you connected in that conference room with the mediator.
Yeah. And I believe the reason that I got that information so clearly is because I was at a point where I was like, I literally don't care what the answer is. If the answer is you were a horrible child killer in the past and you deserve this, it was like, I would rather know that and get on with making my penance than wonder why that happened, if that makes sense. And so there were no self-defense mechanisms to keep me separated from the answer.
Because it's like the soul that keeps incarnating and choosing these different lives and knowing what his was. And of course, taking the guilt off of what you felt. It's like any kind of like grief, like you're always blaming yourself. You want to find a reason, like, did I do this? Did I do that? So it lifted that weight off of you by finding out that you guys helped this soul release this karma and to find what he needed to in this lifetime and move on, and that you're still connected. You were connected in other lifetimes and you're still connected, though not in the physical realm, but you're energetically still connected to him at all times.
Exactly. And I feel that very strongly. Like I said, I still grieve, but even actually the anniversary of his passing was on July 19th. And I just was, I was feeling it and I was reflecting on that. It just
happened.
Yeah. And I was thinking, like, what do I grieve though? What is it that I grieve? Because I feel him here. But of course I grieve, like, never hearing his laughter and, never watching him play. So there are things to grieve, but I feel he's still here. I just have a different kind of relationship to him than the relationship I have with my living children.
Do you feel that perhaps, like, he learned this lesson, he could go to whatever realm afterwards. I mean, even if they do reincarnate, their energy is still with you as he was in this lifetime, correct? But if he's reborn, so do you feel like he might have been reborn into another life since then, or is he still on the other side? Or
I very, very rarely share this, but I know that part of his consciousness is in my son, William.
Yes, I want you to go into that. I definitely want you to share that story. That's so beautiful. My gosh. Yeah. So with that, you did recently have another son, William, and I had you had shared this on your podcast. And I encourage everyone to please go over to her podcast. She's got an amazing podcast, The Third Eye Awakening. And she shared the story of her birth, William. And it's such a beautiful story. I'm sure we're going to get a little bit of the story here, but for the full story, you can go over there and you can hear her baby. She's holding her baby. You can hear her baby like suckling and her little baby noises as she's relaying this story. But if you could, Amy, I would love for you to tell us a bit about the birth of William, because it was just his 1 year, right? In July?
Yeah, on July 8th, he turned 1 year old. Yeah.
And how this was so much different because of your first experience, with your experience with Killian and your experience as a midwife and as a doula, and how you chose to do this differently and to really, honor this birth the way that you felt you needed to.
Yeah, oh boy, before William was even conceived, I knew that he was going to be a free birth, which is a term that is being used these days to just say that there's no medical personnel in attendance. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're birthing alone. I did, but some people might have a free birth and have a photographer there and a friend there or whatever. But it just means nobody's medically managing the birth. And I knew that. I knew that he needed it because he is partly Killian's conscious. I mean, they're two different people. It's really hard even for me to understand. Two different people, same consciousness. I knew he needed that, and I knew I needed that. And so I didn't really prepare for it, although obviously, like, having been a midwife, like, I was pretty prepared already, having had other children. But the reason being is that in what I explained in that episode is that when I was in the hospital with Killian, I don't believe I actually went into labor. I believe that in hindsight, knowing everything that I know as a midwife and a mother, that I was having Braxton Hicks, but I didn't know what Braxton Hicks were because it was my second pregnancy. And it had been a long time since my first one, and I had never had Braxton Hicks in my first pregnancy. They were painless, rhythmic tightenings of my uterus at the 26-week mark, which is like textbook Braxton Hicks. And I just mentioned it to the nurse, and chaos ensued. Absolute chaos. They just assumed right away that it was labor, and like nobody heard my voice, no matter how many times I asked to just let me have time, just leave me alone. No, there was no way. And I was essentially, they were going to deliver him by a C-section. They got me to consent, of course, because they can't do it without consent. But I would say I was very pressured. I was under a lot of duress to give that consent. But he was ultimately born vaginally at the last minute, and I believe that was him saving my uterus for me. At any rate, with William, I just knew that I wasn't going to call anyone unless I needed somebody. I had a midwife. She was like the best. Like, if I had to call anyone, I 100% would call her. But I went into labor when my daughter was falling asleep, and she was 2 at the time, and my partner, he fell asleep with her, which was awesome. So it was about 8:30 or 9 p.m. And I just went to the living room, and I had my crystals. I had my Satyaloka Zez to light and my red fire Zez to light, and I had frankincense and clary sage. And I just chilled on the couch, and I just let the contractions come. And I didn't pay attention to the time. I met the contractions. I was like, I want to surrender to all of this. I want to, from my power, surrender to the lack of control that I have. I want to give it, basically like give it to God, give it to the universe. Like, I don't have control over this, the outcome. I can't guarantee that this baby will live. I can't guarantee that I will live. I was very confident that we would, but I am not God in this life. I can't guarantee those things for myself or anyone. And I just was like, I do not want to be ruled by that fear. I want to be in harmony with the rhythms and the motions of the universe, and let it be what it will be. And so I just sank into that labor experience, and I did not shy away from the pain. I just met the fear every time it came. I met the intensity every time it came. And it ended up progressing very quickly compared to my other labors. And I honestly believe it's because I wasn't paying attention to anybody else. I wasn't worried about anybody else. I wasn't worried about the clock. I didn't need to guard myself or protect myself or anything. I was just doing my thing undisturbed. And I eventually realized, like, whoa, it's getting really strong. If I'm going to get in the bath, I should probably start running the bath. And I got into the bath, and it was still just me. My husband was still asleep. And 15 minutes after I got into the bath, my water broke, and I felt his head descend. And I was like, holy shit, it's happening. And then all of a sudden, I must have sent out a psychic cry, because all of a sudden my husband appeared in the doorway, and he's like, what's going on? He was so groggy. And I was like, I'm just having a baby. And he thought it was going to be hours, because I usually have long labors. But, about 15 minutes after that, William was born. And it was so beautiful and so powerful to just feel like, I am doing this. I don't need anyone to pull my baby out. I don't need anyone to catch my baby. I don't need anybody to check my blood pressure or listen to the baby's heartbeat or anything. I am doing this. And he was born, and he was kind of born, the way we would describe it is floppy, meaning that he was out of his body. It was an intense experience for him too. And he was kind of like floppy, like a little wet noodle, slippery fish. And he wasn't breathing. And it was like, I felt so much peace, because I could feel the cord pulsating, which meant the placenta was still attached. He was getting oxygen through the blood in the placenta. And I was like, thank God I didn't call anyone, because what they would be doing would be clamping and cutting the cord and taking him away and resuscitating him. So artificially breathing for him. And I was like, he doesn't need that. He just needs, this time to transition and declare whether he's staying earthside or not. And I knew he was going to. Like, my feminine intuition knew, and I could just rely on that and not mediate anybody else's fear. And it took about 4 minutes, and then he came around and started crying, and immediately the placenta detached and it came out, and boom, the birth was done with. And I just went and sat on the couch, and my husband cleaned it all up and brought me snacks, and it was like just the most blissful, amazing thing. And I felt totally healed. Like, nobody took it away from me. And that was the important thing, was nobody took over. It was mine and William's.
So beautiful. And I remember in your podcast, you were talking about how you just held your baby, William, in your arms, and you're like, come on, baby, breathe. And where it was his choice to come into this world, instead of it being forced by getting clamped and breathed into, he was going to choose to be here and when to breathe. And
yeah. And I mean, that was so healing too, because I've seen and participated in so many resuscitations that at the time I knew it was needless, and yet nobody hears me. Like, they're so scared that they can't hear reason. And the idea of, they think if you give it, 2 minutes, the baby's going to die. And it was very difficult to be swept up in all of that, and to feel myself invading the free will choice of a baby as part of a team. So it was really healing to just, almost like see and prove to myself, like, yep, as long as the placenta's in place and there's no other sign of emergency, nobody's hemorrhaging, whatever, they just need a bit of time to transition.
Because they've had a long journey
Mhm.
coming from the other side. So, and I can see how that's so much different. I can just see the chaos in a, hospital room and everybody there and the bright lights. I mean, what a shock for the baby to come into this world and have all that around them, getting slapped and getting air forced in their lungs and picking up on the energy in the room. And same thing for the mother. They're going to pick up that energy from the mother. But what is such a different experience? Like, have you noticed any differences in William as opposed to maybe some other children that that might have been born into that more hospital setting, as far as their demeanor or wiser, or what do you feel? What do you pick up?
Well, William's a year old, so it's kind of hard to say. And my other three, like all three of my living children were born at home. I'd say my daughter's birth was kind of difficult, but it was a home birth. And so I can't really compare them with my children, but my oldest son, who's 17 now, is so like, I knew that his home birth, I knew it impacted him. And he is so, so wise and so like sovereign in his energy. William, though, he's very sensitive. And I feel like this is a spillover from his experience in Killian's body, in Killian's incarnation. He's real mama's boy. Like, do not put me down, mommy. You're my favorite person. I love you. Like, we're the same person. Didn't you know? He's like, I'm sure he thinks I'm his romantic partner. He's like, we're in love. Don't, like, what do you mean you're putting me down? We're in love. Hello. So it was a little bit challenging. And I think he was working through the energetic imprints of the abdominal complications he had because he was colicky. And, I breastfed all my children, and I didn't have colicky babies with the other ones. So it's hard to say the lasting effect on him, but I do believe that he has kind of like separation anxiety, and I think it would be even more pronounced if he was born in the hospital because he would have been, or born at home because he would have been resuscitated, which meant that the protocol required him to go have a stay in the special care nursery for observation, and then we would have been separated. And which, as we can see by his birth story, is all totally needless for most babies. So I think he would have been even more challenging as a baby if he had been born in that way.
Because it's so important for the mother to have that hold your baby and to your skin and to your chest, and that bonding it's immediate. I mean, I've never had my own children myself, but like literally recently, I mean, I had my awakening probably in the last big awakening with everything that's happening in the world in the last 2 years. And, and how the media is just, slaughtering, it's just gone topsy-turvy. And like, I look at women now, I mean, I always have, but even more so now, as like, they're carrying these, I don't know, star seeds or these souls within their bodies. And they're the ones that are, they're coming from the other side, and they're the next generation. They're the next generation of, I don't know how to explain what I'm getting at, but it's like, I mean, we're in this ascension period right now, and it feels like they're trying to keep the light from children and women down, like not letting them to be part of this ascension new earth. Do you understand what I'm saying? Or I don't know if I'm.
No, I understand completely what you're saying. I agree. I think that the reason behind all of this, like, it sounds at a surface level very progressive, right? Oh, like we're just including everyone, and our body, our choice, and like transgender people who identify as men can also, who were born with wombs can also have babies. So we're going to call it birthing people, pregnant people, chest feeding, all that. It sounds at a surface level very inclusive, but actually what it is it is erasing and eliminating and distorting the power of the divine feminine. And I'll say and make the disclaimer that I love everyone. And like, if you are transgendered,
Mm-hmm.
I love you. I want you to be you and do you. I'm not threatened by you. I don't want you to change or hide who you are. That it's at a greater level, the political agenda behind it, though, is the erasure of the divine feminine power as an actual portal to other dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
We are a portal to new incarnating consciousness. And I do believe, like you said, it's because there are so many really, really advanced starseed babies that are being born right now that are total game changers. I mean, every generation is a game changer, obviously, but it's accelerating rapidly. And I do believe that it is in an effort to basically injure them at their entry point and
Mm-hmm.
injure their mothers. And I believe that's why the medical system is what it is. I don't think literal doctors or nurses or midwives are thinking this way. I believe at a higher sort of administrative, like beyond hospital administrative, at the top echelons of decision makers, it is the understanding that if they injure the mother-child bond, the mama toto, then they are going to keep us in a very low state of like trauma frequency on
Mm-hmm.
Earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I 100% see that. I see it. I feel it. With everything crazy that's happening out there, and this being able, the schedule, what they're trying to push is, I can clearly see that, and it's really just distressing. And I hope that people really awaken to this, because the divine feminine is rising in the children. It's that whole mother bond structure that we need to not lose during all this. And I'm with Amy as well. If you be whoever you want to be, but it's being shoved down our throats, and there's a nefarious reason for this. So let's honor the mother, honor the mother, honor the divine feminine, honor the children. And that's another reason, like this gene therapy, quote unquote, that's been forced on everyone. It's being forced on like as young as 6 months old. It literally makes my head explode, but I know why they're doing this to these children. And it's exactly what Amy was talking about. So we are getting close. Amy, I know you have a heart out. So just 2 more questions. Where can people find and work with you? You do so many amazing programs. I know you just launched one, you're 12 or 12. Yeah. Can you
Yeah.
explain some of your programs or where people can find you?
Sure. My disclaimer is I'm a manifesting generator.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have so much going on at any given time. It's probably not going to sound organized at all. But my website is amybelair.com. I'm on Instagram at cosmic.oracle. I have the Third Eye Awakening podcast. And then I also have a free Facebook group called Soul Space. And it's just an amazing community. It's almost 2,000 people. And it's like, if you are, you're interested in spiritual awakening topics, anything that people would consider woo-woo, like this is your place. We've got aliens, we've got light language, we've got ghosts, we've got mediumship, we've got the Akashic Records, like everything is there, and beautiful people to talk about it with. But the programs that I have going on are, okay, so I have, my program, 1212 is an ongoing rolling mastermind that it re-enrolls every 3 months, but there are still spaces available. We literally just started this week in mid-July at the time of this conversation. And it is for the application and the embodiment of the Christ light frequency. So to me, what that means is that it has nothing to do with Christianity or religion. It is an ascended level of consciousness. And I'm in no way saying that I am not a Christ. I'm being called to practice this myself, and to hold space for others, for us to really ascend and expand our consciousness so that we become as vessels or avatars for that level of consciousness. And yeah, it's a beautiful group. Very high frequency conversations are happening there. And then I also have a program that is just coming up. It'll be starting in August, and it's called Sorceress, but like source, sorceress.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the acknowledgement. It's for women and men, but I imagine it's usually women that want to work with me. But it is for those of us who know that we are here to like literally, channel the light, alter the weather, not with technology, but through internal mastery, and open portals and stargates to allow consciousness to pass like out of this realm, I see it as a holographic simulation. So out of the simulation onto the next thing that we are creating. And that starts in August. And then I have just launched a Patreon because I do a million different, like, I just love to show up and channel. I love to teach like low cost, accessible offers. And so my Patreon is the collection place where you subscribe and you get access to the various things. So today I just ran a Galactic Gateway Masterclass to open up the Galactic Gateway chakra and connect with our star lineage, and be able to channel from that sort of the galactic and intergalactic consciousness. So that's an example of something that lives in my Patreon now. So those are currently like the best, most alive, exciting ways to work with me.
Great. And I'll put those in the show notes as well. And before we wrap this up, I always ask one last question. What does it mean to live from an awakened heart? But I'd love for you, I have, you had put down here in the notes. Can you explain what the portal of the heart is? Just one quick summation, because I know we have to go.
So I am aware that there is a portal in our heart. Our heart is the access point to the 0 point field while we're still in an incarnation. So it's like the meeting place. First of all, it's the bridge between heaven and earth, the bridge between our lower chakras and our upper chakras. And it's also the meeting place of like the experience of separation in unique incarnations and unity with everything and all there is. And when we cultivate our heart portal, like when we connect in and we are heart-centered beings, there's a portal in there that you kind of like, I don't know really how to describe it, but it feels like your consciousness somersaults through the heart portal, and all of a sudden you're almost like on an endogenous drug trip where you're just like completely connected to everything. Like there's probably a DMT release or something that allows you to be in complete connection and sort of like in body and out of body at the same time.
And how's a quick way to access that?
I don't know if there is a quick way, because I think it requires a lot of cultivation. Our consciousness tends to live up behind our eyes. And so it's like constantly training our consciousness to be seated in the throne of our heart. And but I feel like the pathway to the portal is in deep, deep, deep presence with whatever you're experiencing. So that no matter how intense it is, it's not to say that everything feels good, but it's kind of like my story with being present in my birth with William. If you can just breathe into it and be in it and surrender into it completely in every moment of your life, no matter what it brings to you, then you're not in a state of fear at all. And you kind of like end up getting high on the experience of the crazy wonder of being a human in this crazy realm. And that, I think that's the portals, like going so deeply into a state of presence that you just almost like flip out of the simulation, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And I'm going to practice that. It sounds like a wonderful place to be. Well, Amy, thank you so much for sharing your heartfelt stories with everyone. I'm sure everyone listening in is going to get a lot out of this, and hopefully everybody's going to go check out some of her programs. Amy, thank you again. And I appreciate you being on.
Oh, thank you so much, Nancy. It was wonderful to connect with you.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Awakened Heart Podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, share it with a friend. And if you haven't already, head on over to your favorite podcast app to subscribe, rate, and review. If you have any comments, questions, or feedback, you can reach me at the awakenedheartpodcast.com.